In yesterday's video, we looked at the dark masters of any Flesh Eater court, the Mad Ghoul King at the center of every kingdom, and of course his most trusted advisor, the Varghulf Courtier. Today we're going to be exploring the more common soldiers, really the bulk of what we would call and consider a Flesh Eater court's army. I'm talking the Crypt Ghouls, the Crypt Horrors, and the Crypt Flayers. Now, a unique thing about this army is that each of these kits can also be used to create kind of a unique low-level hero. For example, the Crypt Ghoul kit can be used to make a Crypt Ghast Courtier. You just take one of those models, do a few modifications that come in the rules, and kind of demonstrate to you, and you have a small hero, a solo unit that can assist the larger horde of ghouls. And because there's very little lore individually about all these little side heroes, I'm just going to lump them in with the main unit that they buff or represent. So what I'll do is I'll cover the main unit and then kind of tack on any unique things about their specific type of hero. And we're going to start off with the most numerous of all Flesh Eater court units, and that is the Crypt Ghouls. These are the near-naked dregs of humanity that make up the vast bulk of any court. The term ghoul is known in almost every corner of the realms, and they know them as these forsaken souls that are renowned for their hunger, because it is both insatiable and disgusting. Now, the battle tome points out specifically, and this is interesting to me, that the longer they are in service to their king, the deeper into their delusion they fall. They have less and less chance of seeing glimmers of the truth, which kind of made me wonder, because they pointed it out so specifically, if when they first become a Crypt Ghoul, do they have a lot of these instances where they see the truth of what they are and then just choose not to escape? The book didn't dive into it in a ton of detail, but it just kind of put that thought out there that if you were to make a lore for a newer court, you could have people who are struggling with their new reality. I think that would be a really cool addition. But regardless, when they do fall head over heels into the delusion, they begin to see themselves as disciplined and clean-cut men-at-arms, or swift and silent scouts. Really just your basic line soldier armed with a sword or a halberd, something like that. While of course, in truth, we see the model. They are these impish wretches who scream and tear at the enemy. They're nearly naked, they wield bones and trash as weapons, and they just attack as hordes with like wild abandon. They just go nuts in combat. And it's made clear that if you're fighting one of them, you're probably going to be okay if you're a well-disciplined soldier. But the problem is, they move in hordes, so fighting one is not bad, but when you get into his larger groups, it becomes extremely difficult to handle that kind of wild ferocity that they can deliver. See, the reason why one is easy to kill, because they'll kill somebody and stop and eat them, which means the next guy in your army can easily take down that single Crypt Ghoul. But when there's a flood of them and you hit this solid wall of raving mad lunatics, well, internally, they see each other as competing predators, and so they'll kill a guy, take a bite of him, and then run and lunge at the next guy, and so you get this kind of self-competing wave of people who are just trying to rip and shred and kill and murder uncontrollably. And they're really hard to break in terms of like morale and get them to run away, because most would rather die than forsake their lord's command, their king's command. But those who turn to flee are instantly regarded as prey and eaten. And this is something I touched on yesterday, where you're either with us or against us kind of mentality. And this kind of adds a lot of depth to the delusion, because here's the thing. What we're saying is, not only do you all have a mutual kind of cohesive delusion, you're all super crazy, but you're all on the same wavelength. The second that someone breaks coherency with that, they fall out of that delusion and they instantly become an enemy. Which not only are you all on the same page in terms of being crazy, but your delusion is so living and active that if someone even has a moment of doubt, they are instantly destroyed, right? It's almost like the delusion itself is a living entity that just destroys anything that might conflict with it. And I found that to be so interesting. Now, the little tiny hero that you can build out of this kit is the Crypt Ghast Courtier, and he operates as the field commander of the Crypt Ghouls. And he's kind of, like I said, the low-level hero that kind of coordinates them and rallies them in battle. And of course they see themselves as these great leaders of men, but actually they're just like every other ghoul, save for the horrific ornamentation and spikes and stuff they put in their skins to kind of decorate themselves and show their rank. So why are these different than the vast hordes of ghouls? Well, they've managed to retain some of their sense of their previous life, like a natural skill at leading troops, or maybe they remember some specific experience with ambushing tactics. Realistically, it's just they're slightly more intelligent than the other ghouls, and this kind of intelligence gets kind of adapted into the delusion and twisted with dark efficiency into the army. If you were really good at something that was useful or pertinent to hunting, gathering, killing, fighting, it will be adopted and assimilated into the delusion. And it's also noteworthy that they enforce whatever makes them unique on those under them. For example, if they were gluttonous, the ghouls underneath them will eat like no other ghouls. They'll just devour things like locusts. If they were cruel, they'll focus on inflicting pain before they make the ultimate kill. And what's interesting is it keeps this kind of theme that we've had from the Ghoul King of this kind of trickle-down effect of mentality and temperament. It keeps that, but on multiple levels. It allows for the Ghoul King to pick the right man for the right job. I want my Crypt Ghouls courtier who's really good at running headlong into the enemy. Maybe it's a Khorne guy that I stole and brought into my court. I want that guy to lead the charges, and I want this other section of ghouls over here, the ones who are really good at being gluttonous and devouring everything. Okay, they're going to go second because they're going to be in charge of getting all the food. Like, you can coordinate based on people's uniqueness what your army is like. The next unit here is the Crypt Horrors. Now, moving up from the hordes of ghouls, we look at kind of the more elite branches of the army, the Crypt Horrors. If a ghoul shows some excellent display of skill or loyalty, he might be rewarded for it. The Ghoul King will pour a portion of his blood into a goblet and feed it to the ghoul. Of course, this is a vampire bestowing his blood onto a mortal, but of course everything's kind of twisted and cursed with the Carrion King stuff, so this goes on to create a truly horrific transformation. The ghoul will find his body growing to massive proportions and his speed and strength will increase dramatically. They develop a healing factor that makes them near impervious to damage, and they'll just keep growing to the point where their bones internally will crack and splinter and even jet out from their skin. And they'll just keep growing. It's like an indeterminate growth type thing. And it's important to note that the delusion of them evolves with their new form, because they're now perceived as these towering knights. And I'm not sure if they're perceived as being like on horseback in battle, but that's kind of the imagery we get, right? They're charging headlong into the fight at the forefront. It's emphasized that these are monsters in combat. They are regenerating wounds, they're sweeping blows with like these long arms and using clubs and stuff as swords. And they act as the elite melee unit, the shock troops, and the hammer in combat. And again, this mutation happens because they've ingested the vampire's blood. We haven't seen that really in the Soulblight collection, but I'd be very interested to know if it does happen over there too. If a mortal ingests the vampire's blood without being killed or bitten or whatever the official Age of Sigmar means of becoming a Soulblight is, does it do this across the board, or is this a Flesh Eater specific thing? Regardless, they are led into battle by a Crypt Haunter Courtier. This is, of course, their specific low-level hero. And really, this guy, his unique thing is that he's had more of the vampire's blood than any other. In fact, he's drinking it straight from the vein. And this is a huge honor in the Flesh Eater courts. It grants him even more strength and superiority and resiliency. And if they work hard, they can even rise enough to take command of a detachment of ghouls and horrors. And this would be more for small things like going on a patrol or leading a small hunt. As I said before, bigger things would be led by the Vargolf Courtier. But this is a little bit of autonomy, which, honestly, to be perfectly clear, is really a big deal. Having autonomy in an army that is bound together by a singular will and purpose is actually a big deal. And the last unit we'll talk about today is the Crypt Flayers. Now, this is one more dark transformation that a Ghoul King can bestow. If the flesh of a Terrorgeist is on the dinner table, the Ghoul King can use it in a ritual. He'll sprinkle some of his blood on it, cast kind of a subtle spell on the meal, and those who partake undergo a really, really nasty transformation just like the horrors did. They grow in size and speed and strength but the ritual also brings out elements of the Terrorgeist they are eating. It almost infuses, takes on some of the elements, like I said, the flavors of what makes a Terrorgeist, and bestows that onto a mortal. Instead of these like disturbingly long fingers that the horrors have, they'll start to grow these big leathery wings, and they'll gain the gift of flight. And with that, they kind of soar like a brood of bats over the home of the flesh-eater courts. And in addition to their wings, a change will take place in their chest and their lungs, and they'll be able to let loose a mind-breaking scream just like the Terrorgeist does. It's this kind of disgusting fusion of a vampire, a beast, and like the helpless soul that did it all. Which, of course, is the polar opposite to how they see it. A flesh-eater courts see the Crypt Flayers as almost angelic, as if their lord had gifted their best and brightest with these golden wings and made them angels to defend the kingdom. And this makes them effective scouts and harassing units, able to take out the enemy with a kind of terrible efficiency. And regardless of how you see them, no one really argues that they are devastating in battle. And their unique low-level hero is the Crypt Infernal Courtier. And this is if a Crypt Flayer does something noble or vicious, something to stand out in battle, he is also rewarded. And the Ghoul King will hold a huge feast in their honor. At this feast, the Ghoul King will break off a piece of undead dragon flesh, the zombie dragon flesh, if you will, and lace it with another dark ritual and his blood, and feed it to the Flayer. Again, this time it's dragon instead of Terrorgeist. And they will undergo yet another terrible transformation, getting bigger and stronger even, but also gain an ability of kind of this noxious breath that the zombie dragon has. And this new mutation makes for a potent weapon. So they've been mutated twice over now, and the heroes that achieve this honor are allowed to lead the Dead Watch. The Dead Watch is a term for the Ghoul King's personal bodyguard. Maybe he's riding a zombie dragon or a Terrorgeist, and the Dead Watch are made up primarily of Crypt Flayers, led obviously by a Crypt Infernal, and they're just zooming around the battlefield as this one super deadly fighting force. Really just meant to deliver the Ghoul King to the heart of the battle, where the blood flows freely and the flesh is ripe for picking. So that is all the units and their little respective heroes that you can build out of the kit. What makes these units so fascinating, and how do they really represent this army? Well, starting off, kind of breaking it down, I love the number of small heroes in this force. To me, the release was a groundbreaking one with the amount of internal kit bashing. If you were not around when the Flesh-Eater Courts was released, if we're going our way back machine to Warhammer Fantasy Battles, the kit that now makes the Horrors, Flayers, and the Vargeists, it used to just be Crypt Horrors and Vargeist, but they did a little internal kit bashing, meaning you put the Vargeist wings on a Crypt Horror, and that's what the Crypt Flayer is. So they got real new models, but they got like 6 new War Scrolls, because not only did they kit bash new units, but also heroes as well. It was a fresh exploration of physical design space, meaning what you can do with models, but also game design space. How many War Scrolls can you create kind of from nothing? Given that these heroes buff their respective units in interesting ways, it added a lot of versatility and room to explore without, frankly, a whole lot of investment. In addition to that, the number of low-level heroes kind of keeps things in theme. These are the nobles and leaders of the court who are constantly searching for honor and glory. And every healthy, busy court should be filled with heroes and aspirants and leaders, everyone vying for control and power and authority, but ultimately all to please their king. Additionally, we also see another unique expression of magic. Yesterday we talked about the Ghoul King's ability to kind of have an aura around him, or even infect people just by sticking his finger in some liquid. But today we saw the Ghoul King use his blood to morph and mutate and evolve the humans that are beneath him. And we don't see that in other Soulblight. So this seems to be a unique Flesh-Eater Court vampire ability tied to that curse of the Carrion King. And what's interesting is it's not just mutating with his blood specifically, but that he can take the remains of a creature, add his blood, and it gains effects of both. Like they get bigger and stronger like just his blood does, but they also gain the abilities of a Terrorgeist or a zombie dragon. This is super new and unique. And if it wasn't mired in such a dark faction, imagine how useful it would be. What if you could do this with any animal using the king blood as the key. Because my mind immediately goes to other monsters. Like, if I could do this with other creatures that we know of, what would I do it to? Like gargants, maw crushers, thunder tusks, magma droths. There'd be some really cool things. This is kind of the Age of Sigmar equivalent of Kirby sucking in something and gaining like an ability or something from it. And it's really, really cool. The point is, we keep learning that the defining difference between a Ghoul King and a vampire from Soulblight, for example, is much more than their sanity. It's how their magic expresses itself to everything around it, how it warps and infects things, both in the body and the mind. And that really, really does play out in the troops that we covered today. And that is it for the basic mordants that make up a Flesh Eater Court army. And tomorrow, we're going to wrap up the week by taking a look at the mighty beasts and steeds that a Ghoul King can ride into battle. Of course, the Zombie Dragon and the Terrorgeist. So friends, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a like and subscribe. And if you know someone who plays Flesh Eater Courts and hasn't seen this series, go ahead and send a link on over to them. I would greatly appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in tomorrow's lore video. Thank you all so much for watching, and happy wargaming.